The Delaney Street Echo. The rain wasn't just falling, it was etching the city in silver, a relentless, whispering downpour that turned the neon signs on Delaney Street into bleeding watercolors. I stood under the awning of a closed pawn shop, the ghost of my own breath hanging in the air, watching the number 117 bus pull away with a hydraulic sigh. It was the last one for the night. I'd missed it by a heartbeat. A familiar, cold knot tightened in my stomach, the knot of being stranded, of plans unraveling. It was a feeling I knew intimately, a constant companion in a life that felt perpetually out of sync. This was my existence. Leo Croft, a freelance archivist, a man who organized the histories of others while my own remained a chaotic, unsorted box of regrets and near misses. I had a sense, a maddening, persistent intuition, that the world operated on a frequency I couldn't quite tune into. That there were patterns in the chaos, whispers in the static, if only I could learn how to listen. As the bus's taillights dissolved into the shimmering gloom, a flicker of movement caught my eye. Across the street, in the second-floor window of a dilapidated brownstone wedged between a karaoke bar and a bail bonds office, a light went on. It was a soft, golden glow, starkly different from the cold fluorescence of the street lamps. The window was otherwise dark, the building seemingly derelict. But in that lit pane, for just a second, I saw a silhouette, a tall, slender figure standing perfectly still, looking out into the rain. Looking, I felt with a sudden, inexplicable certainty, directly at me. Then the light went out. A shiver, entirely separate from the night's chill, traced a path down my spine. Synchronicity. A word I'd read in dog-eared library books, a concept that flirted with the edges of my skepticism. Meaningful coincidence. Was this one? A missed bus, a light in the darkness, a silent watcher. Or was it just the pathetic fallacy of a tired man on a rainy night, seeking narrative in his own misfortune? I pulled my coat tighter and decided to walk. The route home was a long, meandering trek through the city's less polished districts. The rain softened the edges of everything, turning the graffiti on the warehouse walls into ancient, runic scripts, the overflowing gutters into murmuring streams. My footsteps echoed in the cavernous silence, a lonely percussion against the city's watery hum. I found my mind drifting back to the figure in the window. There was an unnerving stillness to it, a quality of observation that felt more than human. It wasn't threatening, not exactly. It was expectant. I turned down an alley, a shortcut I usually avoided, drawn by a desire to get out of the relentless rain. The air in the alley was thick with the smell of wet brick and decaying trash. Halfway down, a stack of pallets collapsed with a sudden, jarring clatter. I jumped, my heart hammering against my ribs. But as the echo died, another sound emerged. A voice, low and melodic, almost sung, but the words were unclear. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, woven into the fabric of the rain itself. The key is not in the lock, but in the turning, asterisk. I spun around, peering into the shifting shadows. Hello. My voice was swallowed by the damp walls. There was no one. Just the rain and the dark. A trick of the wind, I told myself. A fragment of a dream, or a song heard long ago, resurfacing from the murk of my subconscious. But the words had felt immediate, present. They lodged in my mind, a cryptic splinter. The next few days were a haze of unease. The incident on Delaney Street clung to me like a scent. I tried to dismiss it, to bury myself in the comforting, tangible past of my work, cataloging a collection of 19th-century botanical illustrations for a university library. But the images of ferns and orchids began to twist in my peripheral vision, their curling fronds resembling the patterns of water swirling down a drain, the veins on leaves mapping out streets I almost recognized. I started dreaming of the brownstone. In the dreams, I would approach the door, which was never the same twice. Sometimes it was heavy oak, sometimes a bead curtain, sometimes a simple rip in the fabric of reality. And each time, just as my hand touched it, I would hear the voice again, the same phrase, "The key is not in the lock, but in the turning." I'd wake with a start, the words echoing in the silent bedroom, my desire to understand now a gnawing obsession. It was this obsession that led me back to Delaney Street 3 days later, under the pale, anemic light of a cloudy afternoon. The brownstone looked even more forlorn in the daylight, its facade grimy, windows boarded up. It was clearly abandoned. A "condemned" notice was plastered across the boarded-up front door. Yet, I had seen a light. I had seen a figure. Driven by a force I didn't understand, I walked around to the side alley. There, half hidden behind an overflowing dumpster, was a rusted iron gate, slightly ajar. Pushing it open with a screech of protest, I found myself in a small, weed-choked courtyard. And there, at the back of the building, was another door. This one was unboarded, a simple, dark green door with a tarnished brass knob. It looked maintained. I knocked, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet yard. There was no answer. I tried the knob. It was unlocked. The interior was a shock. Instead of the dereliction I expected, I found a space of profound stillness and order. It was a single, large room, a library from a dream. Bookshelves climbed to the high ceiling, crammed with volumes of every size and age. A spiral staircase led to a narrow balcony that ran the perimeter. The air smelled of old paper, beeswax, and something else, ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. In the center of the room stood a woman. She was the silhouette from the window. Tall, with hair the color of polished silver pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that held a light of their own, a pale, piercing gray. She wore a simple, dark dress and stood beside a large, circular table piled high with more books and what looked like intricate models made of brass and wire. "You're late," she said. Her voice was the one from the alley. It wasn't accusatory, merely a statement of fact. "Late for what?" I managed, my own voice sounding rough and unused. "For the appointment you made when you chose to see the light," she replied, a faint smile touching her lips. "I am Alara." She gestured for me to sit. I felt like I was moving through water, my disbelief suspended by the sheer impossibility of the place. She knew my name, of course. She knew why I was there before I did. Alara was a psychogeographer, she explained, a cartographer of the interior. Not of physical places, but of the landscapes of the mind, the hidden connections that bind thought to reality. "The world you perceive, Leo, is a translation," she said, her fingers tracing the spine of an ancient, leather-bound book. Your senses are not windows, but interpreters. They take the raw data of existence, the source, and filter it into something your conscious mind can handle. But the filters can be adjusted. The translation can be made more accurate. She spoke of synchronicity not as coincidence, but as a glitch in the matrix, a moment when the underlying code of reality becomes visible. A nudge from the subconscious, which, she claimed, is not locked inside our skulls but is a field we are all immersed in, a vast, shared ocean of thought and potential. The missed bus, the light in the window, these weren't accidents. They were a curriculum. Over the next week, I returned to the library every day. Ilara became my unlikeliest of mentors. Her lessons were not lectures, they were experiences. She had me meditate on a complex, swirling symbol she called the triskelion of awareness, until the lines seemed to move, pulling my consciousness into a vortex. She gave me exercises, to walk through the city not as a destination-oriented traveler, but as a flaneur, absorbing details, noticing the patterns in the cracks on the pavement, the rhythm of a distant siren, the way a flock of pigeons swirled in unison as if guided by a single mind. It's about intent, she would say. The universe responds to a focused mind. Fear, desire, doubt, they are all powerful magnets. You have been magnetizing doubt and isolation for years, Leo. And the world has faithfully reflected that back to you. It sounded like madness. And yet, things began to happen. Small things. I would think of a song from my childhood, and a busker on the corner would begin to play it. I would have a fleeting worry about a deadline, and my client would email me an extension. The world felt softer, more responsive, as if I were learning a new language, the language of my own influence. But as I learned to attract light, I also began to attract shadows. I started seeing a man out of the corner of my eye, a tall man in a dark, long coat, his face always obscured by shadow or a turned-up collar. He was never there when I looked directly, but his presence was a cold spot in my awareness. I dreamed of him too. In these dreams, he was a faceless warden, standing guard before a massive, black vault deep within my own mind. He was the embodiment of my resistance, my deepest fear, that it was all real, that I truly had this power, and that with it came a terrifying responsibility. The dweller on the threshold, Ilara called him when I described the figure. He is not an external monster. He is the conglomerate of all your self-doubt, your past failures, your ingrained limitations. He is the guardian of your old reality. To step into a new one, you must face him. The climax approached not with a bang, but with a creeping dread. The synchronicities became darker, more ominous. I found a dead crow on my doorstep. The news reported a series of bizarre, unsolved burglaries in the area. Nothing was stolen, but the occupants reported feeling an intense, psychic violation, a sense that some essential part of them had been rifled through. I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it was connected to my own journey. I was shining a light into my subconscious, and I was not alone in the dark. One night, the storm returned with a vengeance, lashing the city with a fury that dwarfed the rain of my first visit to Delaney Street. The power flickered and died in my apartment, plunging me into darkness. And in that darkness, I felt him. The dweller. Not as a glimpse, but as a palpable pressure in the room, a malevolent intelligence focused solely on me. The air grew cold. The faint sound of a lock clicking open echoed in the silence, though there was no lock to be seen. I knew what I had to do. This was the turning. Ilara's words came back to me. The key is not in the lock, but in the turning. It was never about finding some external solution. It was about the internal shift. The lock was my fear. The key was my courage to turn within it. I didn't run. I closed my eyes, there in the pitch black of my apartment, and I turned inward. I descended, in my mind's eye, past the clutter of daily anxieties, past the memories of embarrassment and heartache, down into the deepest, coldest part of myself. And there he was. The dweller, a towering silhouette of pure negation, standing before the vault of my greatest potential. He had no face, but I could feel his scorn, his promise of safety in smallness. Go back, the silence seemed to scream. It is easier to be a victim of circumstance than a master of your soul. For a moment, I was paralyzed. The fear was a physical weight, crushing. But then I thought of the light in the window, of Ilara's calm certainty, of the responsive world I had glimpsed. I thought of every time I had felt powerless, and I realized that the feeling itself was the chain. I took a step forward, in my mind. I didn't fight him. I looked at him, and I acknowledged him. You are my fear, I said, my inner voice steady, though my body trembled. You are my doubt. You are a part of me. But you are not all of me. I reached out a hand, not to strike, but to touch. As my fingers neared the shadowy form, it didn't attack. It began to dissolve. It fragmented into 1,000 memories of failure, a million whispered criticisms, and as I held my ground, they lost their power. They became just what they were, memories, thoughts, not truth. The vault behind him didn't burst open with light. It simply faded, because it was never really there. It was another illusion. The pressure in the room vanished. The storm outside seemed to lessen its fury. I opened my eyes. The power was still out, but the darkness was no longer oppressive. It was just the absence of light. I went to Ilara's library the next day. The green door was locked. Taped to it was a simple note with my name on it. Inside, in her elegant script, it read, *, the student becomes the source. The map is now yours to draw. Until the next turning. E*. The brownstone was empty. When I peered through the windows, it was dusty and derelict, as if no one had been inside for decades. I never saw Ilara again. That was 6 months ago. The world hasn't become a paradise. Buses are still missed. Rain still falls. But the filter has been adjusted. I see the patterns now. I understand that my thoughts are not passive whispers, but active sculptors of the clay of my reality. The seeker in me hasn't stopped seeking, but the search is no longer frantic. It's a joyful participation in a mysterious, responsive universe. Sometimes, on rainy nights, I walk the streets not as a stranded soul, but as an observer, a participant. And sometimes, from the corner of my eye, I see someone else, looking lost, looking for a sign. I don't say anything. I just send a silent wish for their courage, for their own turning. And I watch, with a sense of profound wonder, as a street lamp flickers above them, or a stray cat crosses their path, pointing the way. The world is alive with meaning, a constant, whispering conversation. And finally, after all this time, I am learning how to listen. And so the pattern continues. But the question now, is what pattern will you choose to see? If this journey into the whispers between worlds resonated with you, if you felt that strange, familiar tug on the edge of your own perception, then you're not just a listener. You're part of the conversation. By subscribing to this channel, you're not just following a story. You're turning on a light in the darkness, signaling that you're ready to explore more. You're telling the algorithm, that great, modern subconscious, that you seek the mysterious, the atmospheric, the stories that challenge what we call reality. So help us map this hidden terrain. Subscribe, and ensure the next investigation finds its way to you. Leave a like if you felt the turning, if a moment, a line, a shadow, sent a shiver of recognition down your spine. And most importantly, comment below. Tell us about your own synchronicities. The strange coincidence you can't explain. The teacher you met by chance. The fear you faced, or the door you're still trying to find the courage to open. Your story is another thread in the tapestry. Let's unravel this mystery together. This is not the end. It's simply the next turning.